Hello everyone and welcome to another video from Eagles of Empire Miniatures. In today's video we're gonna have a closer look at how hand-to-hand combat works within the Eagles of Empire skirmish rule system. I'm gonna be doing some live examples here covering infantry, cavalry and artillery. I'm also gonna do some examples covering how cover will work, light cover and heavy cover, and also how it works when you're gonna attack across an obstacle, for instance a wall or a fence. If you have some questions to the rule system, don't be shy. Please just leave some comments below and we'll get back to you shortly. We love to communicate with our followers and fellow hobbyists, so please just ask any questions you have, big or small, doesn't matter. If you like what you see today, why don't you jump over to our web shop and have a look at our rule system and our miniatures. We also have paint system for the Franco-Prussian War, so it's a full solution if you want to dive into this really interesting period in European history. So I hope you'll enjoy this video and let's jump into it. Right, so when looking at hand-to-hand combat, I just want to give you a short introduction to the basic units that are going to be involved in hand-to-hand combat on the table. First of all, we have our basic infantry unit, the squad. Each squad will have their own unit card, and each unit card will show you this particular troop type. In this case it's Bavarian line infantry. It will show you the movement range, the weapons range, the firepower, the charge value, which is really interesting for hand-to-hand, which is the value that this unit will have when going into the attack in hand-to-hand. The defense value of this unit, the value, the D6 value, it rolls when defending either in shooting or in hand-to-hand. And lastly, the unit strength, which is the manpower of the unit and also the morale. I'll talk a little more about morale later, but for now, this is the basic infantry unit, the squad. So 2 squads in Eagles of Empire can be attached, form a larger unit, and that is called a section. So 2 squads attached can form a section. Now we mark the attachment by always, no matter how they're moving on the table, having a 2-inch coherence between the unit when you're placing it on the table. So having 2 squads allows you to also field an officer. Fielding officers are free when you add them here to a section. Having an officer on the table will give you the opportunity to start to activate some of your faction's doctrine capabilities that comes with your doctrine card. There are different doctrine cards for the different periods of the war and the different factions. The Prussians have some, the Bavarians have some, and the French Imperial side, Republican French have some. And it reflects the military doctrine of that particular faction and that particular part of the war. So it's an extra historical element to the game, and doctrine activations are basically ways to boost your troops or troops' capability. It could be an extra rate of fire, it could be an extra movement, it could be healing troops on the field, and it can be a lot of other stuff that can help your side win the upper hand on the table. The doctrine activations cost command points, so the officer fielding the officer is free, but when you start to activate the officer's capabilities, it will start to cost command points. Command points, we're going to cover that in another episode, but it's basically earned by conquering and holding tactical objectives on the gaming table. When you're recruiting units, you also pay command points, and the cost for each unit is in the top right corner of all the unit cards. So everything you need to know about your unit is right here on the unit card. Right, so that is the basic infantry unit, a squad and a section. Cavalry is much the same. You have a basic cavalry unit called, in German it's called a Berit. In French it's called a peloton. That is the basic unit of cavalry. Here is a Prussian cuirassier Berit. You will notice that it also has 3 bases representing unit strength 3. And the easy way to show your troops' unit strength is to base them so it corresponds with the unit strength of that unit, because that will give you a lot of advantages when you are looking at representing casualties later on and morale. So here is a unit card for a Berit of Prussian Cuirassiers. Movement rate, they don't have any fire, and they have a charge value, they have a defensive value, they have unit strength 3, and they have some special abilities. Each unit will have their own special abilities. It represents the different, let's say, upsides and downsides of that particular unit. For instance, here in the case of the Cuirassiers, they have a special ability called Large Target, which means that they are basically easy to hit when you're shooting at them. So the unit shooting at them will get an additional D6 fire dice. It's also a unit that has a special ability called Cuirasse, which means they have the breastplate, and they get an additional defensive die in cavalry melee. So that is the basic cavalry unit. You can also have 2 cavalry units attached and they will form a squadron. The basic artillery unit, I'll show you an example here. We have a French Lahit 4-pounder field gun. So this unit has a unit strength of 1, no surprises, it's a single base, really easy to follow. Again, the unit strength here is this equivalent to the base, right? Costs 4 command points to recruit. Again, command points are earned by holding tactical objectives on the table that generates income. So you'll have a steady flow of reinforcements during the game, and you will have command points to spend on some of your doctrines and activations. You have a weapon range, firepower, and if you have 2 artillery, you can form a battery, and that will give you an additional D6 firepower dice. So 2 artillery pieces linked together to form a battery. They will shoot, move, and defend as one, and they'll get an additional D6 when firing. 2 units attached always have to observe the 2-inch coherence rule in the game. So those are the basic units for the game. You can also attach heroes, but I'll touch up on that a little later. Let's look at how hand-to-hand works when a squad is going to go into hand-to-hand with another squad. Right, so in the first example, hand-to-hand example here, we have 2 squads. They're going to go into hand-to-hand. We are going to say that the Bavarian squad is going to be the attacking party, and the French squad, each of them with their own unit card here, we'll cross-reference with those stats in a moment. The French squad is going to be defending. So, of course, you always have to measure and see if the unit can actually close in on the enemy. You do that by looking at the movement rate. So the enemy unit has to be within 6 inches. In this case, we say they are within 6 inches. They're able to close. You declare the hand-to-hand in the movement phase by moving your unit into a 2-inch contact with the enemy. So the proximity here again is 2 inches, then you are in contact, in base contact, right? So those 2 units will now be locked in hand-to-hand. Also means that they can't fire during the subsequent shooting phase. They are locked in hand-to-hand, which will be resolved later than the shooting. So now they are locked in hand-to-hand, and we're going to do the basic example here. First, we'll look at Bavarian charge value, 3d6. Okay, I'm going to place out those 3 dice right there. And the French line infantry, well, they have a 2d6 defense value. We're going to place out those dice too. Right there. So it works like this. a unit in full unit strength will save and hit at 4+. I'm gonna just do this really intuitively by showing it. So each of these units are gonna be, the Bavarians are gonna be hitting at 4+ to get hits, and the French are gonna be saving at 4+ to get saves. Now, let's say that the French had suffered a casualty prior to this engagement. Now, since they're down to unit strength 2, they would be hitting and saving at 5+, right? If they would have been down to unit strength 1, well, tough job. They would have been hitting and saving at 6+. So note that they always keep the number of D6s stated on firepower, charge value, on defensive dice, but the roll that you need to create hits, and to create saves change as the number of unit strength, the morale in the unit falls. When it drops, your to hit value or to save value will change accordingly. So let's try to resolve this hand-to-hand combat. Right, so the Bavarian unit are looking for 4s to hit. They don't create any hits, actually pretty hard roll to get. In this case, the French, they create 1 save. This is an interesting example actually, because you now have surplus saves. There is 1 more save than neutralized hits. What happens then is that the Bavarian unit suffers an unsavable casualty. The charge went really bad. They rolled, 3 dice, didn't get any hits, and the French got more saves than they needed. So in hand-to-hand, it works like this. When you create excess saves, that jumps over to your to the attacker and becomes an unsavable casualty in his unit. Let's do another example. Let's say that the Bavarians, they actually created 2 hits here. And in this case, the French unit had suffered a casualty from before. Now remember, they're down to unit strength 2, so they need 5+ to save. And they don't save. So in this case, you would have 2 hits, 0 saves, and the French unit would have been wiped out. One last example is Bavarian unit creates 2 hits, and the French unit creates 1 save. 2 hits, 1 save, so the French will suffer 1 casualty. Now this means when you're conducting hand-to-hand, the unit that creates the most, that suffers the most casualties is the loser and have to move back 3 inches and regroup. So the French unit moves back, it suffered casualties, so it moves back 3 inches and it regroups. If the Bavarian unit had been within command, so meaning that if it had had an attached officer, it would have had the opportunity to close again and conduct yet another hand-to-hand combat. So that is the basics of a squad attacking a squad. Let's look closer at what happens when a section attacks a squad. So now we have a Bavarian section, so 2 squads of Bavarian line infantry, and they're gonna move in as 1 unit because they're attached. They get to move together, they get to charge together. They're gonna charge the French line infantry squad. So let's try and do this example. They move in and they close in for the hand-to-hand combat. In this case, they are in command, so if they win this hand-to-hand combat, they get to actually do a follow-up charge on the French unit if it survives. Now, let's have a look at the dice. So again, the Bavarian squads each get 3d6. Let's go ahead and place those. Each get 3d6 in charge value, and the French squad gets 2d6 in defense value. So, unlike shooting where one squad rolls first, when you attack as a section in hand-to-hand, the might of sheer body count here is gonna factor in. So you get to roll your attack dice all at once. Remember to look at your two squads within the section and observe the unit strength of each squad. At this example, we have two squads at full strength, so we can roll the dice in one hand, in one roll. But if, for instance, one of the squads had suffered casualties, well, you could still roll at once, but you would have to roll for this squad and then for this squad, because the topmost squad would be looking for 5+ to hit, whereas the bottom most squad would be looking at 4+ to hit, since it's still at full unit strength. So let's run with this example. We have a good portion of hits here. So 3 hits. The French are at full strength, so they're looking for 4+ to save. They do 1 save and will suffer 2 hits. Now, that means they have to move back 3 inches to regroup. And since the Bavarian section here is in command, has an officer attached, they can option in if they want to do a follow-up charge. They do that, they'll charge in like this, and it's back to square one. 3 attack dice here, 3 attack dice here, 2 defensive dice here. Now let's roll these separately, because we have 2 different morales in the 2 squads. Here looking for 4+, 0 hits. Up here looking for 5+, 1 hit. So now the French squad is looking for 6+ to save, because they're down to unit strength 1. Let's say they actually rolled 2 6s. Really lucky shot, the French rolled 2 6s. Well, one of the defense die will neutralize the Bavarian hit. Now we're left with this example again. Excess save. So we're actually saving more than we need to. Now that will jump straight over and create a casualty in the Bavarian unit. The Bavarian player can choose at his own leisure which unit that will suffer the casualty within his section, as long as the units will observe the 2-inch coherence rule. So he'll opt to suffer the casualty here in the unit that hadn't suffered casualty before. Now that actually means that the Bavarian unit loses this round of hand-to-hand, because they suffered 1 casualty and the French didn't. So now they have to move back 3 inches. So those are the basics of attacking into hand-to-hand between a full section and a squad, also covering excess casualties and follow-up charges. Let's jump over and see how it works with multiple units locked into a hand-to-hand. Let's take a closer look at what happens when multiple units get locked into hand-to-hand, and how that all actually can occur on the gaming table. In the foreground here we have a French line infantry squad and a Bavarian line infantry squad. The French player is tempted, he wants to move into hand-to-hand. It's his turn to move. He moves his unit into hand-to-hand and locks these 2 in a hand-to-hand combat. Now the German player, it's his turn now to move a unit. His Bavarian unit is locked in hand-to-hand, so he can't really do anything about that. It has to be resolved, but he can help the situation. Remembering the rule of excess saves turning into casualties in their attacker unit, well, he opts to actually move his Prussian cuirassiers into this hand-to-hand combat. So they'll move on down. And they don't, there's no flank or rear bonus here, so they just move into the fray here with a 2-inch coherence. So what happens then is that during the ensuing hand-to-hand, the French player will be the attacker and the Prussian player or the German player will be the defender. But the tables might have been turned a little bit, and I'll show you why. So the French infantry squad will get their 3d6 charge value as they are the charging unit. We'll go out and place those right here. The Bavarian squad of line infantry get 2d6 as defense value. We'll place those right here. And then the Prussian cuirassier Berit, well, they will have a 2d. They are, remember, even though they moved into the hand-to-hand combat, they are still on the defending side, but they will add a full 2d6 to the die roll, turning the table a little bit. So when you're looking at the overall dice distribution now, you have 3 dice on the French attacking side, but 4 dice on the German side, and any excess saves, not only will the German side win the hand-to-hand, but they will cause unsavable damage on the French side. So let's roll an example here, see what happens. The French infantry, they get 1 hit. Now, the Bavarian unit is in full unit strength, and so is the Prussian cuirassiers. That means they both roll at 4+, so we can roll their dice together. If any of those units had suffered casualties, we would have to roll those 2 dice separately, since we would have different morale. But, you know, it's the same, so we're looking for 4+. Okay, so in this example, it's a stalemate. So the hand-to-hand will continue to be locked to the next round, or the French can actually choose to move back. If we say that, let's say that the Prussians had rolled a little better. Let's say that they actually had 3 saves. Well, then we've had 1 of the attacks neutralized, and we'd have 2 excess saves. And that would have caused 2 unsavable damage within the French unit, because the charge would have been poorly led and it would have created a negative result for the unit. They would have to move back 3 inches to reform. But since none of these 2 units have an officer attached, the German player can't option to make a follow-up charge. So those units would just stay separate, and you would move on to the next hand-to-hand or the next phase within the turn. So that's how multiple units, and it could be stacked up indefinitely. I mean, we can do, let's say that the French decide to go into this attack. The Prussian player moves down his cuirassiers, but up here in the corner, the French, they have another cuirassier unit that actually can make the charge in. They have a 16-inch movement rate, so let's say that they actually are able to make the charge in. They're now also inside the hand-to-hand. That will tip the scale somewhat again. Now there's 2 defensive dice for the Bavarian squad. There's 2 defensive dice for the cuirassiers. The German player is still on the defending side, whilst on the attacking side, the French line infantry would have 3d6. And now we get to feel the power of the cuirassiers, 4d6 charge value. But since the melee now is locked between 2 cavalry units also, it triggers the bonus of the cuirassiers, so they get an extra defense die on the breastplate. But 4 attack dice here for the French cuirassiers. So we are at 7 attack dice towards versus 5 defensive dice on the Prussian side. Now, casualties suffered. We'll roll these unison, right? We'll roll these since all the units inside this big hand-to-hand have the same morale. We can roll the dice together. So we create 1, 2, 3 hits, and we create 4 saves. So in this case, again, the Germans would have won. The French, remember, when you suffer casualties, you as the player suffering the casualty get to remove the casualty. As long as your units observe the 2-inch coherence rule, you'll get to remove the casualties at your discretion. So of course you don't want, or you might want to really, but in this case I wouldn't want to burn any of my expensive cuirassiers. I would want to maybe remove the casualty from my line infantry squad. Let's say that in this case, another example here, that the Prussians didn't create enough saves. The French have 3 hits, Prussians have 2 saves. They'll suffer 1 casualty. They choose to suffer that casualty in the Bavarian infantry squad, and that means they lose the hand-to-hand. They move back 3 inches to reform, and since neither the cuirassiers or the line infantrymen men have a officer attached, they can't do a follow-up charge, so the units will just move on over to next turn, and they can move and shoot and charge again. So that is how it works with multiple units getting locked into hand-to-hand. You can stack them up. It's really nice when you're defending to have your infantry formed as section, because you'll get those the 2 defensive dice of each squad rolled unisonly. Might have a different morale, but they get to roll unisonly, so you can absorb the hits, and you can maybe create those excess casualties, excess saves and casualties in your opponent's unit. So those are some of the twists and turns of multiple units getting locked in hand-to-hand. Let's look a little bit on cover and how it works when you're attacking units behind cover. When looking at cover, we differentiate between light cover and heavy cover. Light cover will give your unit an additional D6 in defense value, whilst hard cover will give each squad or each unit behind the hard cover an additional 2 defense dice. So in this case we have a French infantry squad in light cover in the woods. They are within a line of sight since they are no further than 2 inches into the woods. So the Bavarian section here, consisting of 2 squads of line infantry, can see them and charge them, which is what's gonna happen. They charge in, and in the ensuing dice roll, the French will have their 2 defensive dice plus the bonus for light cover, whilst the Bavarians will have 3 attack dice per squad in their section. Again, we observe that both of the squads in the Bavarian section have full unit strength, so they're 4+ to hit, 4+ to hit, whilst the French squad in light cover also is at full unit strength and also will roll at 4+ to save. The ability to go into the woods and pass into woods is actually marked on the unit special ability. So line infantry has this ability, which is worth noting, because not all units have the ability to go through woods, or as also is marked here, to enter buildings. So line infantry has this ability, but for instance, cavalry does not. Likewise, artillery and so on. So in this case, we'd be rolling the 6 attack dice together, since both of the units have the same morale. We're looking for 4+ to hit. They create only 1 hit. Now the French have a golden opportunity. Remembering the rule of excess saves, traveling back to the attacking unit, creating casualties. That's unsavable. So 4+, all they need here is 2 4s or more. And they do get 2 4s. Excellent save by the French. They neutralize the hit by the casualty here by the Bavarians, and they actually cause an excess save. So the Bavarian unit loses this hand-to-hand. Now, using cover for small units is a golden way to travel through to cross the gaming table and not be too exposed to hand-to-hand. It's really going to give you an upside, like shown here, like demonstrated here. So the Bavarian unit would suffer 1 casualty, and actually they would have to move back 3 inches to regroup after the lost hand-to-hand. So let's also look at another possibility where you'd have a full French section consisting of 2 squads of infantry, and they'd be in command, getting attacked by the same Bavarian section as before. So you would have 2 squads here, while you'd have 2 squads in the woods. Now, looking again at the Bavarian units, each of them will have a charge value of 3d6, so we'll go ahead and place those. And each of the French units would have a 2d6 defense value plus 1d6 for each unit for light cover. So we'll go ahead and place those too. So light cover in this case evens out the score. So it's quite a risk for the Bavarian player to, charge head on over heels straight into a French unit in light cover. That might really put them at risk of suffering excess saves and thus unsavable casualties. Let's try and roll an example here that is going to twist things a little bit. So topmost French squad would have 2 casualties since before. Bottommost Bavarian squad within their section have 2 casualties since before. So up here we have a squad with a unit strength of 2, so now they are saving at 5+. And that 5+ also goes for the additional bonus die that they get because of light cover. Whilst the bottommost squad in the section still save at 4+, since they are at full unit strength. Topmost unit here in the Bavarian section, they will hit at 4+, since they are at full unit strength, whilst the bottommost will hit at 6+, since they are at only 1 in unit strength. So let's try to roll this example and see where that takes us. Well, we're looking for 6s here, creating 0 hits, looking for 4s, creating 2 hits. Put those there. So we're looking for 4s here, the bottommost section, the bottommost unit. Oh, already stacking up the saves. Up here we're looking for 5s. And again, it's a French victory, neutralizing 2 Bavarian casualties here, 2 Bavarian hits, and having an excess of 2 saves. Not a good day for the Bavarians. In this case, I think they choose to lose 2 unit strength in the topmost unit, move back 3 inches, survive another day to fight yet again, but did lose this hand-to-hand. So this is how it works when doing a light cover combat, hand-to-hand combat. And let's have a look at how heavy cover works, because that's a little more tricky. And we now look at an example for heavy cover. And in this scenario, we have a French infantry squad shooting from behind a wall. Now, before starting a game, you always have to agree with the other players at the table what's traversable, where do you have heavy cover, where do you have light cover, and so on. There are some hints and some pointers in the rules, but generally it's just a gentleman thing to do before starting rolling the dice to agree which obstacles will give you what cover and so on. But in this case, this wall is heavy cover, and it works like this. Well, first of all, a wall or a heavy obstacle can't be traversed in one move. The Bavarian unit, if they would charge the French unit on the other side of the wall, it would actually be 2 moves needed to do so. So they have a movement rate of 6 inches. So even if they were, let's say they were 3 inches away from the wall, the first initial move into the hand-to-hand would end at the wall. And the subsequent move that they do would put them into hand-to-hand contact with the French. Now, when looking at this particular example, the Bavarian section has an officer attached. And there's a certain doctrine within the German player's portfolio that gives him the option to activate an extra movement, Prussian tactics. So costs a command point per squad in the section, but let's say that the German player has enough command points that they can actually spend a command point on each of these squads and give them a double movement. So during the movement phase, you declare that I'm gonna use Prussian tactics for this unit, spend 2 command points, giving them an extra movement during the movement phase. The first one would be to move up to the wall. And the second movement would then be to close with the French unit on the other side of the wall. So charging over a wall and into the unit behind the wall still gives the defending unit behind the wall 2d6 bonus as heavy cover. So looking at a French line infantry for this, in this instance, you'd have 2d6 defense value, and you'd get an additional 2d6. If they had been a section, it would have been an additional 2d6 per squad within the section, so 4 and 4. But now they have a squad, they'll get their 2 extra defense dice, and looking at the Bavarians yet again, charge value is 3d6 per squad, so 3 dice here and 3 dice here. And you'd roll this result, Bavarians creating 4 hits, and the French looking for 4+, since they're at full unit strength, only creating 1 save. So in this case, the attack really works out for the Bavarians. One of the hits are saved, and the rest will create 3 casualties, wiping out the French unit behind the wall. The Bavarians will end up here behind the wall. They jumped over and are now themselves in heavy cover. So that's how hand-to-hand works with heavy cover, moving up to or traversing heavy cover. It's a really tricky thing to get a unit to charge over a wall straight into the face of a defending unit with the rate of fire of the breech-loading rifles, even though they would be disciplined and they'd have bayonets fixed and willing to go. It's still going to cause a lot of havoc and a lot of casualties. So that's why we have this rule. You have to have that extra leading capability of your officer to use the doctrine card to get them to do the double movement to get them inside. Otherwise, if your officer does not have this capability, well, then you'd have to go up to the wall, you have to do some close hand-to-hand, close range shooting, and then you can go into hand-to-hand in the following round. That's how it would most likely, I mean, that's the closest depiction of reality that we can do with the rule system. So we choose to make it like this. Let's have a look at how hand-to-hand works for cavalry and artillery. Cavalry, being the most mobile unit on the table, is a unit that can be used, I think, tactically to go in, claim some objectives and get some income. You don't want to get them in at the line of fire. They are really vulnerable. Big horses, breech-loading rifles is not a good combination. So cavalry is something that can be used, I think, mainly to get your tactical objectives, to get the width and coverage of the whole table, but also to maybe steam to the behind the lines of the enemy and maybe capture and to destroy some of his artillery. So I think here we have a somewhat historical example. We have some Prussians, cuirassiers, charging down some French artillery position here. I'm getting kind of a von Bredow death ride feeling, but might just be me. In this case, well, it's a question of looking at your the Prussian movement rate, 16 inches. So that's quite a lot compared to your standard movement rate of infantry of 6 inches. So cavalry has a lot of reach when looking at hand-to-hand. They also carry a lot of punch. Again, looking at the charge value of the cuirassiers here. So they are, it's really a strong unit to put into hand-to-hand combat. So it works like this. You put them into hand-to-hand like this, move them up, get them into at least 2 inch of the enemy unit you want to charge. Charge value 4d6, we'll go ahead and place those. Poor French artillery unit, not made for hand-to-hand combat. Well, we're all the way down here, 1d6 defense value. And since it's unit strength 1, it's going to be defending on 6+. So not really that much of a combat. 4 hits here by the Prussians, 0 saves by the French. Now, let's say that they'd have been a double position, a battery of 2 artillery pieces. They'd have 2 defense die to roll unisonly. But still, artillery in the open getting charged by cavalry, it's not a good combination. So just to give you an example how that works, let's try to look at cavalry against cavalry. Okay, so in our last example of today, we are going to look at cavalry on cavalry. Now this is an epic fight between the 2 heavy cavalry branches here, French cuirassiers against Prussian cuirassiers. Remembering the special ability cuirass, giving each of the Berit or each of the pelotons an additional 2d6s in defense value. So in this case, I think we are going to make the French unit the attacking unit. So French cuirassiers, they will have 4d6 in charge value. Let's put that on the table. They're locking in here for a nice and gory hand-to-hand. And the Prussian unit normally would have had 2d6, but since they are in a cavalry melee, they now have a cuirass, which will defend them. The breastplates will defend them somewhat. So besides their normal 2d6, they get an additional 2d6. Both units are at full unit strength as we view them right here, but let's make this more fun. Let's say that one of the Prussian the Prussian unit has suffered 1 casualty. So what does that mean? That means that we have a French cuirassier unit at full unit strength. So they are looking for 4+ to hit, whilst the Prussian cuirassier unit is down 1 unit strength. They get an additional 2 bonus die because of the breastplate, the special rule called cuirasse, but they only save at 5+ because they're at reduced unit strength. So let's roll this example, see what happens. Get 2 hits made by the French. We get 3 saves made by the Prussians. Now, in this example, we have surplus saves. Now remember, surplus saves means that the hits made by the attacking party gets neutralized, leaving 1 additional or more maybe saves left, and that will just jump on over and cause an unsavable casualty in the attacking unit. In this case, the French unit would have lost the hand-to-hand, they'd have to move back 3 inches and regroup. Let's say that the Prussian unit had been at reduced unit strength, like the current example, so they'd be at 5+ to save. Or even worse, let's handicap them even more this time. They're at unit strength 1. The French, they see this weakened unit on the table, they're going in to make the coup de grace, and the French unit is at full unit strength. So the French charge value, like always, 4d6, Prussian defense value 2d6. Now they're down to unit strength 1, so they only save at 6s. But in this case, the Prussian have an attached hero, von Bredow himself. Now, General von Bredow can be attached to Prussian Beritz, costing 4 command points, and you'll attach him during the recruitment phase. Von Bredow has a special ability called Death Ride. Now, each of the heroes in Eagles of Empire will have special abilities corresponding to what they're known for. These are actual historical characters that made a mark on history. So von Bredow has his Death Ride ability. So let's see. Von Bredow led the famous Death Ride charge against the French artillery at Mars-la-Tour. As long as von Bredow is on the table, all Prussian cuirassiers Berit will have 1 extra defense die. Attach the hero to Prussian cuirassiers. Well, that we have done. So von Bredow is on the table, and he will add another defense die here to the roll for the Prussians. Now, if the French win this hand-to-hand, it's quite a win. Look at the number of command points that the Prussian unit consists of. 6 plus 4, it's 10 command points that's up for grabs here. They can neutralize and reduce 10 command points on the Prussian side. That's pretty. That's a pretty big loss for the Germans. So let's roll the example. 4 dice, attack dice for the French. Let's say that they roll 2 hits. The Prussians in this case, they have 5 dice, but they need 6s to save, and they roll 2 6s. So it's a stalemate, meaning that the French player can decide either to keep it locked in for another round of hand-to-hand, or he can decide to move back. Let's assume that the Prussian unit did not save both. In this case, they would have suffered 1 casualty. They neutralize 1, but they would suffer 1 casualty. Now, the hero does not count as a unit strength. The unit that's been charged is at unit strength 1, so 1 casualty will remove it. And losing a unit with a hero attached means that the hero is also removed together with that unit. The hero will perish together with the unit that he's attached to. So remember to play your heroes with the greatest care. They can be attached to units that are very offensive, sure, but they can also have value and merit to look at a more defensive approach, maybe getting the most of those expensive command points you've spent on the hero, since the the special ability of the hero applies to many of the other units on the table, not only the unit that he's attached to. So that concludes this round of examples of hand-to-hand combat in Eagles of Empire skirmish rules. Remember, any questions, you're so welcome just to drop a comment down below. We'll get back to you straight away and answer anything big and small. We hope this has been informative for you. We hope it's been inspiring, and we hope it'll get you into gaming this really fun and interesting period in history. And we hope you all will just continue enjoying your hobby and get some good games in there with your mates. And be well, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.